Good morning. Good morning, everyone. As you are slowly settling in and finding your tables and people you haven't seen for ages, I will say good morning and welcome to the Youth for Human Rights Conference with the inspiring title that we are going to explore the role and potential of youth work for human rights education mainstreaming. You know that this conference is part of a longer-term project and program implemented by 7 national agencies that's called Youth for Human Rights. Some of you are more involved, some of you are newer in this area, but we are looking forward a day and a half of inspiring and meaningful conversations that will hopefully lead the work forward. This is all made possible by the contribution from the European Commission. And with this said, I would also ask our first speaker to actually open formally the conference so that we can start with the working part. Some of you we met last night with an unofficial opening and a little reception and flavor of Estonian culture. But today we are opening officially, and I will call Ms. Karin de Kelver, the Assistant Program Manager at European Commission, to give us a few opening remarks. Please.
Good morning, everybody. Morning. So my name is Karin de Kelver. I work as an Assistant Program Manager at the Executive Agency of Education, Audiovisual and Culture in the European Commission. It is my honor to open this conference and welcome you all. I would like to begin by sharing some of the context in which this project, Youth for Human Rights, giving the reason for today's International Conference on the Role and the Potential of Youth Work in Human Rights Education Mainstreaming was born. We all remember the tragic terrorist attacks which occurred in Europe in 2015 and which reminded us of the importance of safeguarding the fundamental values stipulated in the Treaty on the European Union. In response to these terrorist attacks, the ministers responsible for education and the European Commissioner responsible for education, youth, culture and sport adopted on 17th of March 2015 the so-called Paris Declaration on promoting citizenship and the common values of freedom, tolerance and non-discrimination through education. Probably all of you have heard about the Paris Declaration, I hope. The Paris Declaration calls for the mobilization of the education and youth sector at European, national, regional and local level. It acknowledges the major role of education and youth work in tackling violent radicalization, promoting inclusion and ownership of Europe's fundamental values. The declaration identifies concrete policy objectives to be pursued by member states and urges EU-level action to cooperate and coordinate, to exchange experiences, and to ensure that the best ideas and practices can be shared throughout the European Union. So in this context, in 2016, the first call for proposals on social inclusion was announced by the European Commission, under which this project was selected. It called for the initiatives from civil society organizations, educational and youth work institutions, as well as from Erasmus Plus national agencies in the field of youth, to combat radicalization and strengthening social inclusion, with a special focus on young people. To that end, the project has been a response to the call in the context of the Paris Declaration from the side of Erasmus Plus national agencies, who found themselves in a favorable position to help the cause by mainstreaming human rights education in the field of youth. This has been essentially a capacity building project aimed to improve understanding, awareness and quality of human rights education, as well as to support the youth field on this matter. The project has involved different stakeholders with an aim to build bridges in between formal and non-formal education and making connections through the network of Erasmus Plus national agencies. It has been a timely initiative, as there is also an anti-human rights discourse existing in European national and local levels. This discourse politicizes human rights and human rights education and makes it a question of taste, which it cannot be. It is vital that access to human rights education is guaranteed. We need human rights education now more than ever, as the global inequalities are widening. Teaching and acceptance of common fundamental values and laying the foundations for more inclusive societies through education, starting from an early age, is of major importance. As is the support to young people to become active citizens and advocates for human rights and fundamental values. I am convinced that through the carefully planned and multi-layered activities of this project, as well as national agencies taking a more explicit and active social role on the matter, an important step has been made to secure and facilitate access for young people to their essential right for human rights education. I look forward to learn through forthcoming discussions and panels of this event and see how the results of this project have supported the important work in the field of youth. I wish you all a nice and inspiring conference, and we will talk later.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam de Kelver. Thanks for stressing out the importance of human rights education and the need for it in today's time, and for opening the conference. Now it's time to introduce ourselves a little bit. So my name is Aisha. I forgot to tell that when I started speaking. So I will be here to help you go through the process of the conference together with my colleague Davide, who you met also last night. And we also wanted to check who we have also in this room. So with this, we will ask you to take your mobile phones out and use them. Not necessarily just checking your emails now and who was sending something in the social networks, but also to go on this address that you can see on the slides with www.menti.com. Okay? So go on that slide, go on that address, and then you will be asked for a code, and soon enough it will appear also on our screens. And there you will have few questions that you need to answer so that we see who we have in the room. The code, as you can see, it is 337096. Okay? And when you put it in, you should get this first question. Okay, we have first person already answering. Perfect. So the first question, as you're saying, is I have experience with the topic of human rights education. And then there are options. Okay, we have, the lead is between 1 and 3 years, so it's, let's say, fairly mid-range experience. We have some gurus as well, that's okay. We will need you. Okay, we have 87 of you who managed to do this. Are we still waiting for someone, just to check? It blocks sometimes, yes, sorry. This is how it goes when we are trying to do everything online and be closer to what young people are doing now. 90 people, okay. So if we look at the graph, it seems that between 1 and 3 years, it's the 1/3 of our group, no? That we have 10% of gurus, and those that are more than 7 years, also quite a lot. But however, 1/4 of people here are less than 1 year in this field. So this will be really a mix of experiences in the room, and this is giving us also the idea of what we can expect, so that in the discussions, maybe we need to be a bit more clear from which viewpoint are we talking and what kind of experience we are bringing in. I will go for the next question. So on your phones, you should have the next one. This is where we wanted to see also in what different levels we are working. You can choose only one here. So primarily in the human rights education, in the ways that you are engaged, which level is it? Local, regional, national, or European? And this seems to be a bit more balanced. Let's see. Okay. So it seems that you're still putting in the answers. So we have European level at 1/3, local level 1/4, national level around 1/3, and then 10% at regional levels. This will be also very important for us for the next day. I don't know if you managed to see in the program, but then we will work also in these different levels and the groups divided in that way. So we have more or less balanced group, and then again the experiences are different if you're working at local or at European level, and we can see how then those can actually work in synergy in moving things forward in this area. I will go for the third question, which is then the final one in seeing who is in the room. And that's the question of your role. We have put quite a few options here, and you can actually choose more than one, because we know that sometimes we are not just in one role, but again, in relation to this topic, in relation to human rights education in youth work. Where do you see yourself? What is your primary role? Mm-hmm. And it seems also here we are quite balanced group. So we have from youth workers and trainers, teachers and professors, human rights education experts, national agency, Erasmus Plus national agencies, human rights education institutions, also 4%, youth organizations, local and national authorities, and others. It would be interesting to understand what is the other, but maybe in the discussions afterward we will see. Yeah, so it seems we have trainers and youth workers, as well as youth organizations, kind of the three most picked roles, or most roles that we have among us, but also quite some presence of national agencies, which is very good for this work in this area and this topic to move forward, and human rights education experts as well. Teachers and professors, local and national youth authority, local national authorities, and human rights education institutions a bit less, but still we have those people here, and this is where the merger between the different areas of work could come handy. So thanks for this part and helping us with doing things online. We are having a bit of a picture who is here, and that will, let's say, help us in the next part of the work. What's following is presentation of actually why we are here, the aims of the conference and the program, so that then we can move to the working part fully. Thank you.
Thank you, Aisha. So we have seen who will contribute to the conference menu, all of you, and different actors. Now we are going to check a little the ingredients of the menu. But before going to the program, let's make a step back. Yeah, make a step back and to try to see which is the origin of this conference, how and where we are now. Yeah. Mark? No? So this conference is the last event of the Youth for Human Rights project. It's a project, yeah? Can you? Sorry, technical programs. The previous one. the project.
Project overview, yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's it. But it's not this one.
That one.
Yeah, finally we have it. So this is the last event, as I was saying, of the Youth for Human Rights project. It's a project of 3 years of length, as it was said before by Kevin de Kelver when she was starting, that was having different national agencies promoting it. It is a project in the framework of Erasmus Plus K Action 3, part of the consortium of social inclusion projects, and we have 7 national agencies partners. Why these 7 national agencies felt the need to promote this project? Well, first of all, to make sense of the already existing and abundant human rights education resources and concepts, then also to benefit of the exchange from the actors of human rights education and from the networks. And all this in order to support the capacity building of youth workers in the area of human rights education. In a way, to mainstream human rights education in youth work, with the ultimate aim of fostering social inclusion. As you can see, and it was mentioned by Karen, it's a project with multi-outcomes and multi-layers. Multi-outcomes. We started with mappings, national and transnational. Then it was set up an expert group. It was elaborated a concept paper on human rights education and youth work. There were resource campaigns in human rights education, capacity building activities for different targets, from youth workers to national agency staff, training of trainers. Then a competence report, survey report about capacity building, evaluations, and all things were filtering to policy recommendations. So we're starting with mapping, capacity building, and we arrived to an advocacy dimension of the project. And these policy recommendations are in draft. They were brought here for us, for working on them, to refine them, to make them better. And so you can understand from this how this European conference is relevant. It's a momentum. It's a final momentum. It's an harvesting momentum in the whole strategy of the Youth for Human Rights project. So, yeah. So as last event of the project, the European Conference has brought here actors from different sectors. You saw in the Mentimeter, a lot of actors, to engage you in discussions about mainstreaming human rights education in youth work and how it pretends to do it. It pretends to do it valorizing the outcomes of the project, gathering further contribution, and especially inspiring suggestions for recommendations and for actions, strengthening the commitment of all the actors at local, regional, national, and European level, and after the conference, conveying these policy recommendations to the responsible body in Europe for youth policies and for youth programs. So now, after this little step back and seeing the aim, we can go and dive into the program. We will start just right after the program presentation with a panel. We will have a keynote speech and a panel about the state of play of human rights education in Europe. And then another inspiring moment will be exploring the outcomes of Youth of Human Rights project. We will do in 2 steps. You will see there will be a gallery of activities, and there will be then another panel with the authors of the publications of the project. So it will be getting inspired this morning. Then after lunch, we will enter in a new mood. It will be, I call it, lab mood, laboratory. We will work on the mainstreaming of human rights education in youth work in different topics, in different workshops. We will have 5 parallel workshops. And there, the idea is to work along all the afternoon and to arrive at the end with inspiring contributions for policy recommendations later on. And these will be deepening and fine-tuning. Tonight, we will have also a surprise. We will have an excursion. I think that you were also enrolling in the excursion at Vabamu. We will give you then later the appointment, the date for going there. Vabamu, who knows what is Vabamu? Anyone? Not from Estonia? Yeah? So Vabamu is a museum about the occupation, the resistance, the freedom, the democracy. And it's also thought as a visit, but also as inspiring our thoughts and our lives. And also gala dinner with a surprise that I don't mention because it's a surprise. So if not, it would be spoiled. Then, tomorrow morning, we will have the feedback from the workshop. So all the inspiring contributions that we collect today, that we pick today, will go to tomorrow plenary to have an idea of what is the state of the 5 topics, how they were growing, developing. And all these contributions will bridge after to the working groups. So the working groups will be the moment in which, at local, regional, national, and European level, we will try to make benefit of all these suggestions. And this will be a moment of action. Can you mark this? We lost.
It's not working.
It's not working? Okay, action planning. I try to make the... So after it, the working groups will collect their, let's say, plans. Hopefully, we will have a map of action plans and commitments. And we will have a summary of the working groups on recommendations and commitments. Then, the closure. The closure will be not just a formal thing. It will be a symbolic thing, so delivering special messages. And this last part, I think it's moving next steps. So we will go through this inspiring, fine-tuning, deepening, planning action, and then planning and moving the next steps. This is all for the program. Well, no, there is also a wish. And the wish is that this European conference could be a successful last event of the Youth for Human Rights project, but overall, it could be a first step for a snowball effect in human rights education mainstreaming in youth work. Thank you. And I pass now the floor to Haja for the panel. We start with the panel.
Thanks, Davide. And at the end, it worked, actually, with the slides. Just that you know. So without losing a lot of time, program is presented. We have a keynote speaker here, Professor Dr. Albert Scher from Freiburg University of Education. So I will give the floor to you. The mics are here. And after the speech, wait, maybe.
So, can you hear me? No. 1, 2?
Yeah?
Louder? Okay? Everybody can hear? Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Everybody can hear. So,
Okay.
can you put the slides on, please? Okay. Welcome by my side. Good morning, everybody. I'm a little bit tired. But, I have prepared a speech for about 45 minutes, but that's true. But I'm given only 15 minutes, so I have to sum up my reflections to some short theses. But I hope you will get the longer version, extended version, as a PDF file after the conference. I've sent them to Estonia, and I hope they will share it. I will sum up some core ideas about the potential of human rights. for youth work for human rights education, because I think there is a discrepancy between the potential of youth work and the reality of youth work. And I will don't give you my ideas what really happens within youth work, but what should be possibilities which can be developed in futures. I will start with a core thesis, which means if we think about human rights education within the framework of youth work, it's really important to not thinking about human rights education as teaching values and knowledge to uneducated young people, but to accept that we have to draw on the experiences and the interests of young people within youth work, and to develop the idea how their experiences and their interests are connected to the ideas of human rights. So there's for my opinion, a sharp difference between human rights education within schools and within the framework of youth work, and I will give you some further ideas why I'm convinced that there should be a different idea of human rights education. Does not work? Wrong button, okay. To start with, I want to say, when we speak about human rights education, we should understand education in the German sense of Bildung. You could translate as critical education, means it's thinking about appropriation of knowledge as reflection of one's own experiences, as development of critical thinking and of clarifications of own beliefs. That means we do not talk about human rights education or education in the sense of transfer of knowledge, of values and norms by knowing teachers to unknowing pupils, not as teaching of supposedly immoral pupils by morally superior teachers. That for me is a core idea what I in the German language would explain as Bildung, critical education, which has implicates a whole other relationship between teachers and pupils, adults and young people, as normally inscribed in the idea of schooling. If you think about human rights education as education through human rights, for me it's very important to respect the ideas, the experiences, the learning processes, the reflections of young people, to inspire them to reflect their own experiences within the framework of human rights, and not to teach them human rights as we would teach mathematics or physical laws. That's the first important remark for me. I, as a second aspect, would like to distinguish three different concepts of human rights, which I would name as a moral conception of human rights, which means human rights are understood as undisputable general standards or principles of a general morality. A second idea is human rights, a legal conception of human rights which it identifies human rights mostly with law. And the third is a political conception of human rights. The political conception of human rights stresses that the concrete meaning of specific human rights and the weighting of different human rights principle has always been controversial and is contested. So if we talk about human rights, we do not escape the room of controversies and conflicts and jump into an uncontested room of a morality which is uncontested, but we are in the middle of a field of political controversies about the meaning of human rights. And this political conception of human rights has the implications that human rights are understood as a vague and unfinished conception of fundamental principles, a field of discourse in which socio-political consequences from political and historical experiences were and are repeatedly negotiated. That for me is really important. For example, if we talk about the European and human rights and relates this question to the cause of refugees and flight, everybody can easily see that the implications of the idea of human rights is ongoingly contested and not really clear. This political conception of human rights has implications for human rights education. Because if we understand human rights in the sense of the political conception of human rights education cannot be restricted to transferring knowledge about values and laws or to a concept of moral education. Moreover, human rights education is always also political education. That means education which addresses the controversies about the right design of a good society. And if I have to answer the question, what is the core topic of the idea of human rights, I would quote Avishai Margalit, an Israeli philosopher, who said, well, human rights are about the core principle of a decent society. And that relates the idea of human rights closely to political issues. So we have to go on, I would like to say we have to reflect about, if you understand human rights education as political education, we have to discuss the question, what is the relevance or the concept of human rights education in the specific setting of youth work in different schools. From my opinion, a core principle of youth work is the voluntarily participation of pupils, of young people. For this reason, youth work cannot force anybody, it cannot force young people to learn about human rights. Youth work doesn't have any power to force anyone to do anything. It's based on free participation. Therefore, youth work depends on addressing the needs and the interests of young people to present itself as an attractive offer to young people. They do have to want to come. They have to find youth work and the debates about human rights within Europe as attractive, as interesting, or as sexy as German young people would say about this topic. To go one step further, when I ask myself, well, how can we make human rights education attractive for young people, I would distinguish between two groups we address. First thing is human rights education addressed to youth which is already politically engaged, who are activists in anti-racist movements or in other feminist movements or other human rights relevant movements. And there it's, for my opinion, easy to answer the question, what is the task of youth work? The task of youth work is to support those, to give them space, room, intellectual support for their engagement in human rights issues. The more complicated question is the question, how can we address human rights education to young people who are not yet politically engaged, who do not understand themselves as active citizens, but as people who are concerned with the problems of their own everyday life? Two green buttons. That's the first point, well, means addressing those who are politically engaged. That's easy to say. I skipped this point. I said it before. I go to the second point. How can we address human rights education to youth who are not politically engaged yet? My core idea here is we should design youth work as a space of experiences where everyone is treated as equal and with equal rights, regardless of gender, social status, skin color, and other criteria. The objective must be to design youth work as a space where equality, equal rights, and respect can be experienced and lived in everyday life. So it means do not teach human rights as values, but to design the spaces of youth work as, in German we would say, Erfahrungsraum. It's not able to translate this. I don't understand. Just a walker, thank you. A space of experiences where human rights can be experienced as values which are relevant in everyday context, well, and to draw the educational process on these experiences. Human rights education cannot stay on this level, on the level of organizing experiences of respect and equality, but it's called upon to encourage and enable the acquisition of knowledge about human rights. what do human rights mean in your everyday life, or how can you reflect your everyday life experiences within the context that you work related to human rights context? What means dignity or right to work or right of asylum for your own everyday situation? That is, I think, a very important task of youth work to make clear for young people. It's good for us, it's good for our dealing with conflicts in everyday life to respect human rights values. No, what's wrong? No? Okay. Another important aspect for me is to teach young people that human rights are rights which are relevant in relation to their own everyday life problems. When we are talking about inclusion, we have to talk about exclusion too, and exclusion is an everyday problem of a lot of young people in Europe. So we don't have to preach them the idea we want to be an inclusive society. We have to show them you as a young member of your national or European society have a right to work, you have a right to your education, and we can show you ways to engage for your own rights. So I would say for a lot of young people, human rights should enable them to articulate their own interests, to tackle, to fight for their own for political processes, for their own problems, not for the problems of others. The other side is human rights education should not be or should not lead to an egoistic understanding of one's own interests. That's a big difference between human rights education and influential positions of nationalistic politics. We say, well, we fight for our own rights as Hungarians, Germans, or whatever. Therefore, human rights education is called up to raise the question of justice and solidarity within a European and an international level, because solidarity is always a universalistic idea, and the idea of human rights leads to the idea we have to fight for the human rights of all people, not only within Europe and against Africa and other regions of the world. So I think really difficult task is to talk with young people about the question, how is engagement, activism for your own rights and for your own interests related to the question of global solidarity and to the idea of human rights for all and everywhere. And there is no easy answer to this question, and it's not a good idea to say, well, that's an abstract moral concept, but in the concrete terms of political decisions, we don't have any answers. We have to discuss this question very seriously, especially related to the question of how do we deal with refugees at the borders of the European Union and within the European Union. I come to a concluding remark. I've written down, one cannot have both at the same time. Young people who are informed, empowered, and committed to human rights, and to accept all the guidelines and the decisions of state policy without criticism. Human rights can be politically quite uncomfortable, even in the case of youth work, that's their price. I have written this down reflecting on the question when I look at my experiences within youth work activism in Germany. I see when youth centers or youth groups engage themselves for human rights against right-wing extremism, for example, or for the rights of refugees. They are not always welcomed by political actors. They organize demonstrations. They ask, why should this young friend of us coming from West Africa not stay in Germany? And they get in conflict with politics on the local and the regional level. So I think we should take in mind that when we engage young people for human rights, and if we are successful, we will not always be applauded by politicals on all levels, because we will get in conflict with political, and that's the price of human rights education. It's not a space of of debates which are everybody comes to consensus. It's the space where we get into conflicts. So we should make clear, if we understand human rights as a political issue, if we understand human rights education as political education, we enter a field of political conflict, and that for me is a situation we have to accept. So I hope we get further in the next days and we'll be able to talk about these issues. Thank you.
Thank you. You can already sit here. Huh? Thank you, Professor. This was indeed very powerful, I would say, with some of the questions about the human rights as political issue and then what kind of conflicts it raises or it could raise and what is the price for that. And also you gave us a nice idea how youth work shouldn't be only about education and teaching, but more about experiences that young people have. So I hope we can continue in this way, in kind of opening and having ideas what to do differently so that the things can move forward. We are continuing with the panel after Professor's remarks on the state of play and trends of human rights education in youth work in Europe. So I will ask the panelists to join me while I'm introducing them. So Annette Schneider from Amnesty International, please. Yeah. Celia Markula from European Youth Forum, welcome. Dariusz Grzemny, youth worker and trainer, and Rui Gomes from Council of Europe. So we are having limited time here, and 4 of people who really have a lot to contribute to the topic. So how are we going to do this is with a short, inspiring, and to-the-point inputs from our panelists, and then we will, after all of them actually give us their thoughts and inputs, we will open the session for interaction. So not after each speaker speaks. Would this be okay for everyone? That we are kind of doing with the time this thing. So without further ado, I will give the floor to you, and maybe in the order in which I was calling you, or no? Okay. This is, Rui, you are voluntarily first, it seems. So, let me just check, this works. There you go.
I think you are taking a risk here.
Yeah. So, Rui Gomes, Council of Europe, please give us your thoughts about the current state of play and trends in human rights education youth work in Europe.
Well, good morning, everyone. First of all, thanks for inviting us and inviting the Council of Europe to this debate. It's very enriching to be here. I'm very pleased that to be also among such an experienced audience in human rights education. I don't think I have to explain what the Council of Europe is, and this is a privilege because usually I have to start with that. So let me also use this opportunity to thank and congratulate the organizers of the project for having initiated this project, because it was very much needed, I think, to bring human rights education to the center also of youth work and of the Erasmus Plus program. I followed with great interest what Professor just told us about the intricacies of human rights education and all the conflicts that it is associated with. And I would like to say that for the side of the Council of Europe, obviously the protection of human rights and fundamental freedoms has to be grounded on legal instruments, so the legal side of human rights. The role played by the European Convention on Human Rights, for example, is closely associated with the capacity of the European Court of Human Rights as a judicial body to also take on board individual complaints, for example. And the same can be said about the efficacy or the efficiency of other Council of Europe conventions. In other words, human rights from a legal and from a political perspective need to be written down and agreed upon somewhere. They are not just ideas, they are important values, but what makes them strong is also that they are legal, and that sense reinforces their legitimacy. It's not the only source of legitimacy, but it's also an important one. Now, we launched the Human Rights Education Program in the year 2000, precisely to support the mainstreaming of human rights education in youth work and youth policy practices. We can say that the program was relatively successful, but we also met a lot of skepticism, and part of that skepticism was from the side of human rights experts who would say, but you do not know enough about human rights. to undertake human rights, leave that to the human rights professionals. And we met the resistance from the educational professionals who said, but you don't have the competence to do education anyway, so what you're doing is something. And this is true also in the reflection of the legal side of human rights education. The right to human rights education is not really very much acknowledged or written down. When we, I think successfully, managed to have the Committee of Ministers of the Council of Europe adopting the Council of Europe Charter on Education for Democratic Citizenship and Human Rights Education, which represents an important step in acknowledging the role of youth work and especially youth organizations for human rights education, we fell short of acknowledging a right to human rights education. And even within the Council of Europe, in various conferences and instances, I met resistance of saying, no, there's not written anywhere that we have a right to human rights education. Human rights education is important, but calling it a right would be detrimental to the concept of human rights itself. And I'm just saying this because I think it's an important limit that we have to work against. However, and I think that's where your input comes in and your experiences come in, this is also, of course, the strength. The strength is that we can be effective in other ways. And human rights education is more than learning the legal side of human rights. It's learning for, it's learning through, and I would stress, it's also learning about. Despite the fact that we are not experts in human rights, and despite the fact that we put emphasis on the process, together, or as strongly as on content, we also need to call a cat a cat. We need to say human rights is this. Human rights are these commitments. Human rights is what brings us together. Human rights forms part of the fundamental values, as the opening speech reminded us, of the fundamental values of us living together. And they are written down somewhere, and you can claim them. And they are in your constitution, most likely. So it is important, I believe, to strengthen this dimension. It does not have to be the center of the thing. It does not have to be the center of the program, but it needs to be more than just ideas or political views. It is important to translate and anchor those political views in existing commitments of the states, because that's what gives also us legitimacy to claim our rights. And in this respect, I just would like to say that for the recommendations, for example, that come out, or conclusions of this project, it is also important to know that we're not doing them only because our experiences told us that they're very important, but because there are actually commitments of governments and of European institutions to these values and to these norms. I would end by saying that, by just referring to two things, or maybe three actually. First one is that I think we all, or many of us certainly, were impressed with Greta Thunberg addressing world leaders and saying, you failed us. But it was also reassuring to see that she and other activists like her put some governments sued some governments for failing precisely their commitments in the right to a safe environment or the right to health. And that is, I think, also important. That certainly strengthens the case. Then I would also invite you never to keep human rights education in the background. I was sitting with a governmental representative about 2 weeks ago, and we are doing a project together, and he, because it's a he, was telling me, you know, Mr. Gomes, this on human rights education, we don't really need that. You know, keep it in the background. And I said, what do you mean keeping in the background? You know, it's about participation and democratic citizenship. So why don't you just put youth participation? And I said, but this is supposed to be about human rights education. Yes, but you don't need to say that, do you? And I think we need to say that. I think we need to be firm, vocal, and affirmative about what we actually mean. And that's youth participation is extremely important, isn't it, European Youth Forum? But it is not always the same as human rights education. I mean, we know of many undemocratic regimes that have very high levels of youth participation, and precisely because they are not democratic. So it's not the same thing. Finally, I would like to say that I think we have made a long way, and this project is evidence of that. what we need is, I believe, to combine these different initiatives. You have, for example, in the Council of Europe's youth work recommendation, you have, again, a recognition of the role that youth work has for this. So, and you have it in projects like this. I think that we are getting there, but we need to be more consistent in the way we do it and in the way we advocate for it. The Charter on EDCHRE, which I quoted and I finished, is going to be reviewed again in 2022. It is a soft review mechanism, but it is important that we all, especially those of us who are active in youth work, take part in it and do not leave this task only to governments. They have their responsibility and they have to call them to their responsibility, but we cannot leave it only to them. And here I stop. Thank you.
Rui. Thank you, Rui. You have painted the European landscape with the limitations of the legal and also practical terms. No? Maybe it's exactly to continue with Darius, who can give us maybe a bit more optimistic view on the local level of how the human rights education is playing out there, let's say.
I was actually thinking if pessimistic is more relevant. But I try to be always optimistic, and it's interesting to come after Rui, who was more talking about the European, let's say, framework, being Council of Europe and the Court of Human Rights and the Human Rights Education Program. I work as a youth worker on the local level, but local is also part of European. So, and I think there will be no European if there is no local, or at least what I think. I work in the local organization that works with children and young people. We do a lot of youth work and we do a lot of human rights education, which is a part of our youth work practice. Basically, the organization I work with, which is located in western part of Poland, works around the issue of violence, any type of violence, mainly peer violence, youth violence, and so on. Just to give you the context of, and I was really thinking what I should tell you here as this, to present this. What is this picture of human rights education in Europe? So I decided I'll tell you the story. Because I think stories tell a lot of things. Recently, we have been doing a lot of activities with young people, and it was very much based on the need of young people to work around the issue of gender equality and the rights of LGBTIQ people. So we organized some workshops. They were always also organizing the workshops and so on. Then we decided that actually the young people decided they would like to do the same workshops with the young people in their schools, with the classes. They are young people in the age of 15, 16 mainly. So they went to schools, they prepared the whole lesson plans, how to do it. They went to schools, they did the workshops, and a week after, we got an official complaint from the municipal council, from one of the local politicians, actually telling us in the official letter, which was sent by the president as well of the city, that we are promoting gender ideology, whatever it is, in schools. And we are promoting sick life behaviors. And it was official complaint with the request that we should provide the lesson plan to the local council, and they will revise it and see what we are promoting. We actually had this plan very detailed because young people needed it detailed, but we said, yeah, but these people have nothing to do with youth work and education. They don't understand, so we just remove a lot of parts of this lesson plan. We sent them very general plan, and there was no response. So I assume they accepted it, and there was no problem. Little did we know that the forces are being accumulated, and then another kind of approach is being kind of prepared. Last Friday in Poland, young people organized in schools the day which is called Rainbow Friday. It's basically very much the initiative of young people, very informal, where they show solidarity to people, to LGBTIQ people. They usually come to school wearing colorful clothes. They maybe do some workshops and so on. It's very It's very negatively pictured in Poland nowadays on the media and also by the politicians and so on. And the local politician now from regional council, so a little bit higher, actually attacked us again, although we had nothing to do with organizing it. But some of the young people that are coming to our youth center, they do it in their schools. And they said they are coming from, or they are coming to our organization. So we have been called on local media by local politicians as a leftist organization. And then the young people who were organizing it in one school, their names were put on one of the politicians' official Facebook page, names and the class where they go, the school, so they were easily identified. And one of these boys who was organizing this day in his school was outed as a gay person on the official Facebook page of the local politician. A lot of them are trained in human rights education, and the reaction was amazing. A lot of them actually tried to send the messages to me, also to this guy, asking him if everything is fine. So they were really taking care of the person. I think that this is one of the strengths that where you were talking a lot about, Professor, about political aspects and so on. I think the youth work is also, it's first of all, very much a relational practice. Also, it's working a lot about relationships. And so this was very strong. They really took care of this person. But then they felt that this is not enough. And there's actually one of the girls who contacted me told me, I suddenly understood what you told us once on the human rights workshop, that you recognize your human rights when they are violated. And this was the moment I really felt, but would I know that this right was violated if I didn't know that it was my human right? That it was that I have the right to peaceful assembly, that I have the right to show what I think, and I have the right to show solidarity with other people as well. So they didn't stop there. Actually, what they did the next day was very shocking for me, was they organized a petition online to remove this politician from the regional council. It's not possible. It's not so easy, maybe. It is probably possible, but not so easy. But the petition was all over the media. People were signing it, and they are still signing it. And I think that this shows also the strength of human rights education that these young people went through, that they really showed that they care about not only egoistic or their rights, they care about the rights of the other people, and they also don't stop there. They also want to take action. So I think that they want to make, it's okay. I didn't even look at my notes. It's also good to have notes, but I don't. It's also this kind of responsibility that they felt to make human rights a reality in their school or in their community. Thank you.
Thank you, Dariusz. I was afraid for the moment that the story would turn out completely pessimistic, but thanks for sharing how young people actually got empowered through the human rights education. Celia, you can tell us a bit more from the Youth Forum perspective and the role of youth organizations in today's Europe and the trends with the human rights education. Please.
Thank you. My generation is very often accused of being apathetic, not caring about politics. But contrary to this myth, we are quite engaged in many forms of civic action. We volunteer, we join movements, we march all across the world for climate. We support social movements, both online and offline. Our voice very often is the loudest one, actually, when it comes to fighting for a fairer society where human rights are realized. But at the same time, our rights are also very often not realized. When we talk about the challenges of young people, we very often don't realize that these are actually about human rights. My name is Silja Markkula, and I'm a board member of the European Youth Forum. We are a platform of more than 100 youth organizations in Europe, the largest collective of youth organizations in the world. And my aim today is to give you a few insights of the role of youth organizations when it comes to human rights education. I'll speak briefly about the challenges that we face when it comes to our human rights, and I'll give you a bit of a glimpse of the role that youth organizations, what is it that we do when it comes to human rights education. But firstly, on the challenges. We face quite a lot of challenges when it comes to our lives, when it comes to the transition from childhood to adulthood to independence. Nearly 1 out of 4 young people face the risk of poverty or social exclusion. We face challenges in accessing quality jobs, quality education, in accessing vocational training, healthcare, social security. The list goes on. There's a variety of challenges that we as young people face. In short, far too many young people are not accessing their rights. And yet, when it comes to those challenges, we rarely talk about them from the perspective of human rights. They're merely challenges of young people. They're not human rights violations or youth rights. And how can this be? Why, when we talk about rights violations of young people, why don't we talk about the human rights aspect? Why is it that this is somehow invisible in our societies when it comes to age-based discrimination of youth? A part of the answer is that not all rights, not all social groups are given the same level of protection of their rights in society, and despite the multitude of barriers that young people face and discrimination, we have yet to be recognized as a group that needs specific protection. And this is also why we in the European Youth Forum are actively fighting for young people's rights, or youth rights as we like to call them. And this leads to my second point. What is the role of youth organizations? What is it that we do when it comes to fighting for the rights of young people, and when it comes to human rights education in particular? Non-formal education, that's one of the key defining features of youth organizations. And it contributes through different ways when it comes to human rights education, both through personal and social outcomes, but also civic and political outcomes. For instance, by increasing the awareness of issues on local and international level. Through education, young people, they can learn about their rights, and as you said, if you don't know about your rights, it's very hard to go out there and claim them. It's very hard to take actions against governments who are responsible for ensuring that those rights are realized. But this is something that youth organizations actively do. Try to raise the awareness of those rights. It's also essential that institutions realize this, that youth organizations do play a key role here, that institutions recognize that non-formal education plays an important role in providing young people with those skills, with the knowledge and awareness of human rights, and also about the ways how to claim those rights. So in conclusion, through the link between non-formal education and youth work and youth organizations, we cover a wide range of topics, of human rights related topics. And youth organizations have a key role to play when it comes to mobilizing young people, in raising awareness, in building that social connection that builds your feeling of belonging towards society. Thank you.
Thank you, Silja. Thanks for an insight into your generation and also for putting forward non-formal education as an important part of this both youth work and human rights education, I would say. We have Annette Schneider also from Amnesty International, and actually with a lot of experience in human rights education in different fields and different areas. So please, I understood you want to tell us a little bit about learning trends specifically, or let's see.
Perhaps.
There you go.
Thank you. Thank you also for the organizers to invite Amnesty International to take part in this conference and in this project, the culmination of this project. I think it's, as you said, I have experience in different areas, different fields, from the Council of Europe and from Amnesty International. In my human rights education journey over 15 years, it was from both sides, intergovernmental and, let's say, working against governments and trying to hold governments to account for their obligations. And in my capacity specifically, that's their obligation to provide the right to human rights education, but not only in the sense of advocacy, but also in the sense of actually practicing human rights education globally. So Amnesty International is a global movement of more than 7 million supporters. We have a core part of our business. Many people are very aware of the campaigning work that's done, the research that's done, the advocacy that's done, but a core part of Amnesty's business is also practicing and implementing human rights education. Last year, in 2018, when we measured our progress in human rights education throughout the movement, we were able to engage just over 1 million people in human rights education work. That is how many people we reached. It doesn't mean to say that all those people we reached we cannot measure the impact of what actually happened. We can measure only so far. And that's one of the points. I wanted to bring 2 points in today. And the points I want to bring in come more from the challenges we face in Amnesty as a movement and an organization in practicing human rights education, and my personal challenges in understanding how to move forward in human rights education, because I feel I've come to a standstill. The first one is about how we measure impact, which I just started to mention briefly there. I think we've done great work at a small scale at being able to evaluate the human rights education efforts we have by being able to measure the objectives and whether they're fulfilled, measuring the change of behavior in a very small scale situation. What I have always struggled to understand is where we are able to see the societal impact that human rights education efforts, that institutions, organizations, and youth work in general has. What is that societal impact? And what part of that societal impact can you attribute towards human rights education? And I think we need to invest more in being able to understand how to measure this impact, this societal change impact, if we want to really advocate for mainstreaming human rights education in youth work further and beyond this conference and this project and the institutions and organizations we're working for in this room. I think it would be great if we can look a little bit into that over the next 1.5 days. The other thing that troubles Amnesty, or troubles me specifically a little bit more over the past, let's say, about 5 years that it's become more concerning, is to understand where young people are at these days. And maybe you can help give me some insights into that, because I'm no longer young. And what I mean to say is not just where they're at, because I can see where they're at. They're on their phones. And you can read it in studies. You can see it online. I mean, I go online to find this information as well. Young people spend in Europe more than 8 hours connected to their mobile phone or in front of a screen per day on average. But the studies vary greatly, from up to 12 hours to down to 6 hours. But in general, they're spending a lot of time on their phones. This is also where young people are learning. And young people are learning through social media, through their peers, just like they do in youth work. They're learning through observation, using YouTube, watching videos. They're learning by experience online. They're learning through interaction in forums and engaging. They're engaging online with other people through messaging. They're learning through Netflix. They're learning through self-paced courses. They're learning through gaming. I went into a youth club in my local area in Oslo, where I live recently, and all the young people there in the youth club were gaming. It was a gaming night. Everyone was gaming. What I think we need to look more at is how we are forging the space for learning journeys, and in particular human rights education learning and human rights education competency development and human rights education discussions based on the principles and the community building based on principles and values of human rights. How are we forging that space online, and are we doing it adequately? I think we've made some progress in terms of building e-learning into youth work to a certain degree when we offer possible causes. But I think that that's not even the tip of the iceberg at where young people are at these days. And if you look at the learning trends, at how young people, and I look at from a global perspective in Amnesty, if you look at the learning trends, how people are learning, the key learning trends are short, nano-sized learning or micro-learning journeys or self-paced learning, and people pick things up and they do it, and they have this same lifelong learning experience, but a lot of this is not necessarily taking place now just in face-to-face settings, but it's taking place online. And I think we need to build that bridge a bit further between the youth work settings where we want to mainstream human rights education to looking at how we're doing that in that youth space in the World Wide Web as well. So that's the challenge that I have, and I'd like to throw out as well here today.
Thank you, Annette. And it's very, very relevant challenge. So thanks for bringing it in the online learning trends and these micro levels, what you're saying, and quite a lot of liberty in picking up what we are learning. Professor, you have a few more minutes to give a few more thoughts that are there.
I want to add just some short remarks. Well, I would say we are really far away from human rights education mainstreaming. Mainstream means implementing human rights education in schools, in universities, in vocational training, and in youth work as a general topic. I would say in Germany we are really far away from it. It's more a grassroots movement, human rights education within youth work. There are some teachers, there are some professors dealing with the question of human rights education, but it's really far away from mainstreaming, and I believe in other European countries this might be the same. The second remark is, I think we are now talking about human rights education, mainstreaming or education, in a time of crisis of the idea of human rights. And I think we have to take very seriously a process which leads to that idea of human rights as the common values of the Western society or the global society are really threatened. I think threatened by primarily nationalism, which is, for my opinion, actually one of the most influential and dangerous political ideologies of our times. We are looking at new regaining of nationalism in different parts of the world, even within Europe. And there is a conservative rollback in a lot of questions. He talked about gender issues. Well, there are political scientists who say, well, all processes of emancipation which were reached after 1968 and on, there is a rollback against all those ideas which is related to the question of human rights. We have a rollback in strengthening of racist ideas in the German society at the moment. So the question of discrimination of black people, I did research about it. I could tell a lot of stories about the experience of young black people in Germany in different contexts about discrimination. And I say, well, we should not talk here about the idea, well, we are in a process of human rights mainstreaming. We are looking at golden times, at golden future. But I think we should think more about what can we do as some kind of grassroots movement in cooperation with state actors in times where the idea of human rights as values is threatened, where we have to face nationalism, right-wing extremism, cultural conservatism as threats, and we have to think about where is our position and what can we do to get a little bit more influence on the processes.
Thank you.
Not pessimistic, but I'm pessimistic.
No, it's important. It's important that we are awakened in a way. Huh? So thank you, Professor, and thanks for all the panelists. Now it's the time to kind of have this interactive moment. We heard a little bit about the European landscape. We heard what's happening at the local level, how youth organizations are contributing and where are the challenges there, and also what are the learning trends which we are not maybe necessarily very fast in picking up and then responding. All with this idea that there is a crisis of idea of human rights, of the notion of human rights, and we are there maybe still drinking tea and kind of playing in our fields. So with all these thoughts and provoking, I would say, thoughts, is there any reactions, comments, questions that some of you would like to share with the panel? Okay, I see one there, and then you. Okay, so I have 3, and I think with the amount of time, that's about it. So please.
Just in terms of the status of human rights within the European Union, as a disabled person, I would like to bring up the following example. The UN Convention on the Rights of People with Disabilities, which all EU member states have ratified, its Article 19 stipulates that all people with disabilities have the right to live independently within the community and to choose where they live. And yet institutions for disabled people are being built with EU money. So if I believe the European Union and we as a European community are to have any legitimacy as a human rights actor, we really need to start putting our money where our mouth is in terms of actually upholding our common commitments and ensuring that that violations of human rights do not occur with absolute freedom from consequence.
Thank you. Let's take all the 3, and then we will have responses from the panel. So, yeah, for you. Mm-hmm.
Hi, my name is Michelle. Can you hear me? Okay. So I'm a political scientist, and I work as a freelance trainer in political and human rights education. And well, my question is to Dr. Albert Scher. So I totally agree with the point you made. And right now, to me, the main challenge of political education is how we can change what is happening right now. I live in Germany, and I live in Thüringen, and we had the last elections in Thüringen's Wahltag, and the results were shocking, and I was very afraid of them, but I was expecting them because I see what is happening, and I haven't researched. I lived what racism is in Thüringen, and I think, what can we do to change this? Because I think this is the challenge right now, to change what is happening. And I agree with what you mentioned about the rollback from this ideology, and I think it's happening and it's going to be worse. But what can we do instead of just sitting and taking tea and to say, oh, this is happening, this is a reality. But if we don't change what is happening, things are going to be worse, because 10% of the population in Thüringen now are voting for right extremism ideas. And I've noticed that people doesn't even know what are they voting for. So what can we do? This is the challenge, and I agree totally with you. What can we do?
Thank you. Very easy questions we are having today. And we have one more here. Yes.
Hello. Paavo Pyykkönen from the Finnish National Agency, and thanks for the panelists. Very interesting, nice points of views. I just wanted to use this moment to maybe point out in this depressive world that we still all have a role in it, and if we think about youth work and a set of values in which the youth work works, and if we put those in practice wherever we are with young people, regardless their background or whatever, then we can already work along the ideas of human rights per se. And like you said, that it's hard maybe to be aware of these rights unless they are violated, but it is also our roles to point out in situations that when this kind of learning moments happen, that these belong to the ideas of human rights, so that the general understanding of human rights will spread within the young people. And it's also the fact that we cannot learn things from the top down anyway. It's the same way with participation. You cannot be 13 and goes directly on the European level. You start learning participation, deciding about the things near you. And then you get confidence and you go further. It's the same thing about understanding human rights. You first think about the things that are near you and then expand when you start learning more. I think that we can do a lot if we, as youth organizations, youth work providers, try to reach as many young people as we can. We try to encounter them in a constructive, positive manner, and we can talk about, in a safe situations, about difficult topics if needed. Thank you.
Thank you. So I will return back to the panel. We had a comment here, but also two questions, if any one of you would like to respond.
I can react shortly to the direct question. We can talk about it later with in a German debate, but I want to give one answer. Well, if you look at the actual situation with right-wing extremism, it has a history. The history started in the early 1990s. Well, and I could talk a lot of recommendations we as scientists have given to politics what should be done against right-wing extremism. We have written and written and written and wrote. We are good for strengthening youth work, which is guided by democratic and anti-racist principles, but the political sphere was not happy with that. They wanted some kind of unpolitical youth work, which go on the left side, and so they don't, no, let us alone with those ideas. And they opened the space where right-wing activists could address young people, say, we engage ourselves for you. And so in this room, I would say one important measure against right-wing extremism in whole Europe is strengthening youth work, which is guided by democratic and explicit anti-racist and anti-nationalist principles. But therefore, you need a politic which allows youth work to take position against nationalism, against racism, and for democratic values. And that's the problem he showed us.
Thank you, Professor. Anyone else wants to react on the questions and comments we had?
I have the mic now. I'll start with the first comment. Thank you very much. I'll give a very broad reaction to this from, again, a youth organization's perspective. When it comes to the question of claiming your rights, when you have actually realized that, okay, this right that I have is not realized, what we have done in the European Youth Forum, we have actually taken legal action against the government of Belgium to ban unpaid internships. We're still waiting for the result after 3 years in the process. And this is a very long process if we talk about a collective complaint, and it's only one way to raise those claims against governments. But if we look at the process itself, it is not at all accessible to young people. It's not at all youth-friendly. It's not something that a young person without support would do on their own, or even an average youth organization. They wouldn't have the capacity and knowledge to do that. And this is why we in the European Youth Forum are trying to support our member organizations to do so. But also we're trying to make a change in the processes themselves to be more accessible.
Okay.
Then regarding the change that is happening, I think this is also highly important to highlight. I think we very often talk about the economically lost generation after the crisis that we had a decade ago, but we rarely talk about, we talk about the economically lost generation, but we rarely talk about the politically lost generation. If my generations, if we lose hope towards society, if we lose trust in politicians, that's a very tricky thing to rebuild, to regain trust after politicians have not committed to young people. Just as a reflection for the rest of the 2 days.
Thanks. And Rui?
Thank you for recalling the importance of the United Nations Convention on the Rights of People with Disabilities. I think it's a very good example of precisely the importance of having these conventions, not because they exist, but because they give us, and they should give us, more opportunities to advocate for our rights and to claim them from the duty bearers, in this case, often governmental institutions. I think it's extremely important that you brought this up. I think on the question of Germany and the example that was given, or the crisis of human rights, the backlash, the rollbacks, I think that a lot has to do also with the growing social inequalities and the acceptance of inequality as almost inevitable, never ending. I mean, we have now, how many is it people? 50 people owing half the world. So what will be the next record? It's 2 people owing the whole world. Owning the whole, I mean, where does it stop? And this seems to be endless. And at the same time, we have millions of people who feel dispossessed, who live on the edge sometimes of what their means allow. And I don't think we can disconnect the two. I don't think there is a connection. I don't think there is a causality relation between this and that, between inequalities and the rollback of human rights. But I think there are connections, and we have to look at them together. One thing, I believe, cannot be looked at without the other. At the same time, I mean, and we also have to question our own system and our own economic ecosystem, if that makes sense, which is that we keep on measuring development by GDP growth. It's what matters. That's what matters. It's not well-being, it's not democracy, is GDP. That's what really counts. Thanks for bringing the question about the economic crisis. And I think we have to be aware that this is also a problem. And that's what I mean by being connected. It is true that when I am in the Council of Europe, I've seen many declarations, I've seen many statements, I've seen many conferences as well, and I've seen, like you have seen, I'm sure, situations where the same politicians who signed to something are the same ones who the day after cut the budgets for exactly the same thing they supported in the morning or the day before. And this is where I think our work also as human rights activists or simply as citizens is important. Because, and I think that's where there is hope, not everyone is bad. Not all politicians are bad. Not all politicians act the same way. And there are also many well-minded politicians and political leaders and just civil society leaders. And I think that we have also to support them and to help them in their task. Yeah, I think that indeed our role, like our Finnish colleague said, is also to support people, young people in this, to recognize them as actors. The big thing, what I like about human rights education is that, in a way, the learners are all activists because, and they are all concerned because they are also human rights holders. And what is funny is that whenever you have people, even people who are very much against any human rights ideology, if anybody questions them, they immediately raise up their human rights flag. But this is my right. Okay? I find that always very ironic, but also very strong in a way. I think it gives us a very good point. I think we live in a time when human rightism, which I thought would never happen, that human rightism has become a kind of a left-wing, kind of really horrible ideology. You know, if I want to call somebody a bad name nowadays, politically I will almost call it, you bloody human rightist. And I would just like to say, when I'm called bloody human rightist, I would like to be called it for good reasons. And to be able to say, yes, I am a human rightist, because I do stand for human rights. Thank you.
Thank you, Rui. And thanks, everyone. And it seems what we are having from the interaction as well is that there is much more clear that there is a need for societal change, kind of, in not just necessarily in our little area, but kind of more areas for synergies and moving towards this idea of human rights being actually lived in our societies. Before we close this session, I will give floor to Davide to give you a few more informations, and then we are continuing with the coffee break and afterwards. And thanks again for the panel.
Thank you very much. Very inspiring. Thank you very much. Before the break, there is a lot of people that is working to make this conference possible. And I would like to take the chance to introduce you briefly one of them now. It's our graphic recorder, Siri. An applause. Siri was working hard on all the visual identity of the conference, and you saw her all the morning visualizing what was said by panelists and in the introduction. So, Siri, I don't know, do you have the micro, or I can bring for you a micro. You want to address a few words to the public for your role here.
Thank you, Davide. Hello from my side. Some points which I wanted to share you is that you are all very welcome to come and see closer the graphic recording during the breaks, before the lunch, and take as many photos you want to take. And also, if you have something which you would like to add here, you can approach me and I can draw it down quickly, hopefully. Thank you. Have a nice synergy.
Thank you, Siri. Today in the workshop, she will also come to harvest a little your suggestions, your contributions for something special for tomorrow morning. And now it's break time. We are going just along the corridor. We have the break. And we start from there at 11:30. So we will be there at 11:30 for the next session with your human rights education object, if possible. If you have it, bring it. So enjoy the break and see you at 11:30 there. So welcome back. Welcome back from the exploration. Yeah, we hope that you enjoyed to explore a little more the project activities, talking with people, looking, and there was also interesting captions. We have the votes of the quotes we will tell you at the end. But one thing that was coming to my mind is that it is interesting, all this enthusiasm in all these activities. I think that we have to work on strategy, and we are here for that. How to vehiculate all this motivation, because we have a lot of optimism to work on. And for that, I would like to welcome here the authors of the publications of the project. We have here Miguel Ángel García López. We have Theo Gabrielides, Gülezin Demutlu Unal, and Andreas Karsten. They were writing together also with Adina Marina Sherban, that is not here, but she was part of this group of authors. They were writing, creating the publications of the project, and they are going to give us some insights now. I want to tell you something. Going deep in the project, I discovered how much the work that they did with mappings, with concept papers, with the survey reports, was influencing the whole life of what you saw there, the activities, the project. So it's very important also, all this part of reflections, of insights. And I would like to do like before, so to go one by one with the inputs, inspiring inputs, and then leaving time for you, for questions to them. So I would like to start with Miguel. Miguel, as you can see here, is evaluator and consultant for European Commission, Council of Europe, and other NGOs. And he was author of the synthesis report of the Human Rights Education National Mappings, and also of the Transnational Human Rights Education Mapping. So mappings. So in all these mappings, Miguel, what they were telling you, and what you can tell us about them.
Okay, so thank you, Davide. Please allow me to thank as well the organizers. I was involved at the very beginning of the project, and for me, it's a pleasure to be here and to close the circle somehow. So yes, well, in the synthesis report, okay, so the 8 countries involved in this project, they made a mapping on the actors and practices, and then I put together these results in a synthesis report. And the findings and the details of the findings, they are available, but I would like to focus, and I don't know if those are good or bad news, on the missing topics and the uncovered approaches, because for the good and for the bad, I think they are still relevant 2 years later, or at least this is what I think. So one of the first findings is, well, you see there, missing topics, but in fact, what was coming out were missing target groups, or not enough specialized approaches and methods and practices for human rights in relation with young people with mixed abilities, young people without papers, LGBTIQ, young people, Roma youth, and so on and so forth. So this is not that much about missing topics, but about specialized approaches to certain target groups. And then uncover approaches from the educational point of view, and I think this is in line with what Annette was reflecting this morning, is very much to the work online. So working with moving games, online courses, digital storytelling, and so on and so forth. So this was very much. As I said, those are the, let's say, the missing points. Of course, a lot of things have been done, a lot of things are done, but not for being pessimistic, I wanted to focus on these missing points, because I think they can inspire our future action, or put the focus on what we still need to do somehow. So, and then in the transnational human rights mapping, we were looking not at the national level, but at European level, and we looked at the existing training of trainers, training of youth workers, and the educational resources. The detailed contents of the mapping is a bit out to date, because in between other courses were done, and so on and so forth. But again, I think what is still relevant are what is missing. As I say, for the good and for the bad, because eventually we should have managed to cover those things. And again, we find there the coming issues at European level: migration, asylum, radicalization leading to violence, sustainable development. And the further needs, looking at the European level, will be the follow-up activities at national and local level. A lot of things have been done in this project, okay, those networking and national activities, but still, I think there is a lot to be done. And then the translation and adaptation of educational resources and their digitalization, so that materials, educational materials, games, manuals on human rights education, and so on, so that they are translated in different languages, so that they are available for everybody at national level, and make them available digitally. And something maybe deserves a bit more explanation: these emancipatory methodologies. So what is meant by that is not just methodologies that make people aware on human rights, but really motivate them to take action for human rights. So not to get out of this cascade of we make people aware and they become aware and they make other people aware and everybody is aware or not, but then action is a bit missing. So people were saying that more emancipatory methodologies might be needed. There is an idea, I think maybe afterwards for the for the debate. I observe a kind of, how to say, I detect a kind of fragmentation in the practices and the approaches. And with this, I don't mean anything negative, but yeah, fragmentation, let's say, not an overall picture, coherent, continuous, and so on and so forth. That was for the moment.
Thank you very much, Miguel. Also very practical insights, from these mappings. These mappings were at the start of the project, so all the project was influenced in a way from this work that Miguel was doing. I didn't mention it before, apart from outside in the gallery where you found the hard copies, you can find in the web page of the project all the publications that we are going to present today. So this is possible to save also paper to look there. So then we have with us Theo and Gulessin. Theo is director of YARS, International Institute, and many other things. It's professor, co-editor. Gulessin is trainer and facilitator, mainly in the domain of human rights education, working with the Council of Europe and the European Commission Youth Program. So they were working on the concept paper that was created just after the mappings. There was an expert group created, and then it came this concept paper, mostly to address the national agency and all the stakeholders that are willing to mainstream human rights education in youth work, giving an analytical account of the state of human rights education in youth work and also concrete recommendations. Theo, you have something to say about a business case, no? That you were.
I'll try. Hello, everybody, and thank you very much for the invitation, and congratulations for the conference. Yes, I had a very small role in the project. I edited the concept paper with Gulessin and Adina. We wrote the conceptual framework within which the project was then delivered and the trainings were delivered. There's a lot of information in the paper, so I'm not going to go through it. So I chose one theme out of it, and I tend to be critical when we start talking about human rights education. And in this specific context, we wrote the paper for human rights education in youth work. So there's a lot of material out there, including compact, very thorough for human rights education for youth work. This particular paper, the concept paper, was created for this project. So I'll just pick one theme out of it, and that is what I call the business case for human rights, because we all talk about doing human rights, and human rights education is a good thing or something that we must do, but we never ask why we should do it. And in the 20 years of me being in the business of human rights, it's the same question that keeps coming back. And we all say human rights, but we don't mean the same thing, first of all. And we all say we need to do human rights, but we don't know why we should be doing human rights. And it's kind of, I use the analogy of the fork and knife when you go to a restaurant and you go to eat and you expect the fork and knife to be clean. You don't expect to go to a restaurant and get a dirty fork and knife. So that's human rights. That's what we'll kind of assume that is there. But it's not always there. It's only when it's not there that we start complaining. And why am I saying that? Because when you ask the youth worker why they should be doing human rights, or why we should be introducing it, human rights education, as part of their standards or their training, they'll probably say, like all other public servants or anyone who works in the field, but we're doing it already. Why should we be doing something more? What is this more? And this is the business case that I call for human rights. It's just proving, and somebody spoke about impact, proving what that extra mile is when we say human rights or human rights education in youth work. So we've got to accept that if we're still talking so many years after the European Convention on Human Rights about human rights, what human rights is, what human rights education is, we must accept that there is a misunderstanding of human rights and human rights education and confusion. Those are two different things. And it's not just amongst the professionals, it's also amongst the public. And if you ask human rights, you either get this high-level, terrorists or human rights atrocities, or you will get all celebrities are using it, or the bad view of human rights. Rarely you would think about human rights as dignity, respect, equality, fairness, all those things that matter to everybody. And we've got to accept that. And we have to ask, what is the reason why we all agree here that human rights is a good thing, human rights litigation adds value, we're still not doing it. And even the national agencies that are involved in this project, they're still struggling to understand how they will introduce it into the youth workers' curriculum. So we must accept that. And my assumption, and what we said in the paper, is that's because we haven't convinced why this human rights education adds value, why human rights would add value to youth work, which youth work, by definition, is human rights. If you engage in youth work, you sign up to human rights. That is the given. And there's various ways to convince about this business case, and I'm just going to skip about that. Right. Is this extra, pardon? Oh, right. So we use this stick and carrot analogy. I don't know if you know this expression is, in the old days when there weren't any cars, you had horses. And you would either use the stick or the carrot for the horse to move, right? So if the stick is something that you have to do when you are a youth worker or a nurse or somebody who works in the public sector, and they say, look, there is a convention, there is a law, it's the legal dimension of human rights that we talked about before, and if you don't do it, you will breach the law, so you'll be in trouble. That's the stick. But what we failed, and the stick might be different in different countries, right? We have the European Convention of Human Rights, but then it's how this is implemented in the different countries, and the same goes for youth work and national standards and so on. So that's not consistent. But what is consistent is when we start thinking about the carrot, which is not the stick, is not what you have to do, is what, if you do human rights, what is the extra thing that you would get, right? And I listed a few things in terms of the stick that exist if you're running a business and all those conventions and all those sort of things. But if we are going to use this carrot approach and you are a youth worker and you want to measure the impact of human rights and you're the youth worker, what are those questions that we need to ask and then answer that then will convince the youth worker to take up a human rights education course or to do the human rights twist in the way that we do, or that they do. And there'll be things like, what is your customer satisfaction level? So customers are the young people. Are they experiencing a better youth work following your human rights education? Are you asking them, have they seen any difference? Is your work better after learning about human rights? Has it changed or is it the same? And we need to be open to those questions, because when we ask them, and here is the converted, we're not preaching the converted, there are a lot of people that are not convinced about human rights. So we need to be prepared to say, well, actually, nothing has changed. It's exactly the same. Is it financially beneficial? Because what is driving youth work now is whether the funding is there. And we're talking about financial crisis. So if you are going to be doing human rights, has it actually got you more money? Has it cut down your costs? When you get the funding, have you proved that that is beneficial financially? We're not asking those questions. And has it made you, as a youth worker, a better youth worker and a better person? Or has it actually made you more angry? Or have you actually realized your biases towards a certain minority, towards, when you look at young people and the power structures that revolve around youth work? Sorry.
No,
thank you.
It's okay. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Theo, for this reflection. And now we go in the same concept paper with Gulizin, some reflections about the relevance of human rights education in youth work.
Okay. Hi. Thank you so much for the organizers. It's a nice feeling to be here on many levels, but it's also nice to get a closure for this project so other things can start. Because my involvement started 3 years ago, so I kind of need a closure as well. Feeling the pressure of being only female on the panel a little bit, I like to dress a bit more feminine. This is the best I get. So just to mention that. On the concept paper, we took things quite literary. So what is the relevance of human rights education in the training of youth workers? So something becomes relevant for a task, we figured, if it increases the likelihood of reaching a goal. So I mean, it's relevant that we use microphones, no, in this room. So it helps the speaking to reach to everybody, hopefully. So in our case, then, what's the relevance of human rights education for youth work? To reach what? Yeah. Then that's the question. If youth work is the task, then what's the goal? And for the part of the audience that I completely lost now by saying what's the goal of youth work, because it's not a recent discussion and it's not a discussion I will do now, but that's the starting point of our paper. And we defined, after the research, we took that, okay, youth work is to ensure, to sustain a living democracy. So that's our base. That's why we do youth work. And we look at if human rights education has something more to add to this type of youth work, to sustain a living democracy, then what would be the added value of human rights education in youth work for this goal? Then we discuss youth work, all these different definitions, then human rights education, all in the paper, but it has already been discussed in the panel before and just now as well. So I will just quickly go through 4 points that we think makes youth work more likely to contribute to sustain a living democracy. The first one is it has an impact on the democratic practices of youth work. It's so great, and it's necessary to talk about the state and the young people, the ones we are voting for or not, and how it influences. But when you have human rights education involved in youth work, then it also opens up discussion about democratic practices within youth work, no? Not youth work and the rest of the world, but within youth work. And about the workplace, about organization. So for instance, freedom of expression. So if you're really practicing freedom of expression and association in your organization with the young people that you work for, things might change than how you planned in your work plan for 3 years ahead. See what I mean? This is the first one. So in terms of decision making, in terms of how the funds are used, what are the priorities for youth work, we think it will have a positive impact on all these in the direction for democracy. The second one, we cannot discuss, we say in the paper that the relationship between youth worker and young people is also a relation based on power. So we need to perhaps talk more about power and what do we do with this power. And with power, you can do many things. I mean, you can use your power to reach the goal. You can abuse your power successfully or, well, unsuccessfully as well. Or you can also ignore the power that you have and you basically do nothing with it. We think with human rights education, or we claim in the paper that with human rights education for the youth worker, it gets more clear what's their power and what are the ways to use it on a value-based with their work with young people. Just to give an example, wow, I still have 2 minutes, so cool. For a young refugee, being in touch with a youth worker that in need of accommodation, let's say, yeah? The youth worker can be the only link for that young person to have access to safe accommodation. And that is such a powerful relationship, and it's quite vertical, no? You don't have a safe place to stay, and there's somebody else who have the information to reach to that. It is a power position to have this knowledge. But then with human rights education, if the youth worker knows their rights, and this is about emancipation as well, if they know about their own rights as youth worker, they also know the rights of the young people. So it's not about offering a safe place anymore, or being so kind or so nice to give the information. No, it's actually being together with that young person, claiming his right, her right, or their right for safe accommodation. This changes the relationship completely. So that's the second point. The third point, we think human rights education has also, will also have an impact on how the professional understand their profession. So what do I do as a youth worker? Why do I do it? So you, how to say, you're not then only defining it with how much you get paid or how well your mother understands what you're doing in all those crazy activities with crazy young people, but it might give you, or it might give youth workers a better ground in understanding the function of their profession if the goal is clear that it's about democracy and it's about equality, it's about autonomy, it's about dignity, and it goes on and on. So it will change. It would probably change the understanding of the profession. And finally, of course, but there's also a culture of human rights. So it will not only impact the relationship, the profession, but it will also have an impact on the society at large. And one of the things about human rights education, I think I would like to bring it in, is that the process and the outcome are not different. So it's not that there is a process and then comes an outcome. Not really. This is what we mean when we say human rights education is about, it's for human rights, and it's through human rights. So on the moment that you start to practice human rights education with people, it's exactly the moment that you are changing things. You're not waiting for an outcome at another moment. And this is the fourth point that we have in the concept paper when we look into the relevance of human rights education, how it might affect youth work and youth worker education. Thank you very much for your patience.
Thank you. Thank you, Gülizin. So the concept papers were then having an impact on the national transfer seminars. They were having impact also on the creation of the modules of the capacity building activities. And Andreas, which is a researcher, is coordinator of the think tank Youth Policy Labs and other things, other roles in life, was working at the end with the competence survey report about all these capacity building activities that you had the chance also in the lobby to meet participants of these organizers of these activities. So you have some key findings from this survey, no, to share with us, Andreas.
I do. Thank you. Always nice to be the last nail in the coffin. All right. So we did surveys of participants before each training activity as well as after each training activity, both at transnational level, so the training for trainers, as well as at national level, or the training courses. Before trainings, which is very typical, most of aspiring participants actually responded. After the trainings, between half and a little less than half, depending on activity, of participants still did. So it's a pretty good sample. And a couple of things that we found out, I mean, we have a 100-page or so report with graphics in it, but a couple of things that we found out is, one, that one training course module to establish human rights education in youth work in the context of Erasmus Plus Youth in Action is not going to do. One size fits all does not work. So there were a couple of youth workers who had already substantive experience with human rights education in these courses, even though they were not necessarily targeted at them. And they were much more critical and much less satisfied with these courses than newcomers to the topic of human rights education were. So that's one of our key findings. One size fits all is not going to work. Yep. Another one is something that we have already learned through the race studies, where we did a very similar approach at a much larger scale in the capacity building project, RACAP, is that the model that we often use in youth work and youth trainers education, youth sector education, looking at knowledge, skills, values, and attitudes, fogs up a lot of things, and that a lot of participants of training activities are not very easily able to actually say what kind of knowledge and skills and values and attitudes they want to learn, and which of these they have learned. Has become a little bit of a mantra, you know, everybody talks about it, but nobody really knows anymore what they're actually talking about. So what we wanted to do is also look not only at knowledge, skills, values, attitudes, but also slice human rights education in a different way. So we looked at what was available at the time, the mapping of Miguel, the larger debate in the youth sector, and we came up with 7 dimensions that we looked at, which you also see written there. So the intellectual dimension, the educational dimension, the societal, juridical, political, programmatic, and digital aspects of human rights education. And we asked people, what do you want to learn about all of these? And have you learned what you wanted to learn about all of these? And what you see here is that some of these dimensions, people said that the trainings they participated in did not focus enough on them. So that's the yellow bar that you see across all of them. And what you see is, in particular, the political aspects of human rights and human rights education. They're about half of all responding participants of activities said the seminars and trainings that we attended did not focus enough on it. But then also juridical aspects, programmatic aspects. So where can you find money, support for all of these? Digital aspects, Miguel already spoke to that. And intellectual aspects. What are the concepts of human rights education and human rights? Where do they come from? How can we critique them? All of these things. And which was a very different picture from just looking at knowledge, skills, values, attitudes, where everybody seemed reasonably happy. But then we sliced it in that way, and people became distinctly more critical. Another key finding, which I think surprises no one, is human rights education in the context of Erasmus Plus means we can't only start from the learning needs of the people that we want to come to these trainings. Knowing what you don't know takes some expertise in the subject area, and if we want to bring more people into human rights education, learning needs is not the only basis that we can use to design training and education offers for them. And so we asked them before what they wanted to learn about and what they needed most. We asked them afterwards what they had learned, and you see in these graphs quite a sizable shift, so that people did not really think they wanted to learn so much about political aspects. But when they came back, they said, whoa, that was the one thing that was really missing. And the last one, that I brought with me today is looking beyond the modalities and formats that we use. So several of these dimensions that we sliced human rights education into, youth workers say they don't really address in their practice at all. One of them that really surprised us in the context of Erasmus Plus was the programmatic one. So where can you actually find program support and program funding for human rights education, which seems pretty crucial to a multiplying effect. But then also, there were a lot of people who said 1 weekend was not enough to dive into this topic and walk out with confidence, with enough confidence to apply human rights education in their own youth work. So there were a lot of people who said, we loved the topic, but we are not confident enough to yet use it in our work. Details you have in all these graphs. Questions, we're all yours.
Thank you, Andreas. So thank you very much. And now it's the moment of opening up a round of words or questions that you may have for our speakers. Yeah? It's about the publications, but can be about also other aspects that they were mentioning, their reflections. Also, you can interact with among you with any question if you want to deepen. Any question there? Yeah. The micro. No, it's out loud. No. But can you give? It was supposed to have. But they will not listen you.
I would like to address a question to Güllesin. Well, you talked about the role of the youth worker related to a refugee who is looking for accommodation. What do you think, what is the role of the youth worker if the application of a young migrant as refugee is rejected and he is told leave the country and he don't want to leave the country? What would be a human rights answer of the situation? We had a law in Germany coming in, and the law says you are not a refugee concerning to the European law, so go back to Africa or Italy or elsewhere. What is your understanding of the role of the youth worker?
We see if there are other questions, and then we answer. We pick another couple of them. So we have one from Giselle.
Yes, I have a question. No, we have a question for Andreas. I'm super happy to hear that one of the outcome or the result is that we need to look beyond the usual models. So this knowledge, skills, attitude, and values way of thinking. I think it's a question we need to ask ourselves more and more. But I wanted to know if you can elaborate a little bit more in these different categories, because I don't see this as contradicting. There are more dimensions in a way for me, very valid, so I don't question that, but it's not like either or. So I just wanted to have your thought on that. Thank you.
Thank you, Giselle. Any other question? You can pick another one. Okay? If there is not, we can start and then... Oh, we have another one. Yeah? Yeah. Come on, Musti.
Thank you. I have a question, but maybe I didn't get it so clear. But in the beginning of the PowerPoint, we had it about missing topics. That wasn't in the draft nota, and I'm worried about it because if we are working on this project already for 3 years, then we should really be concerned about all those missing topics, because those missing topics are the ones who really are fighting for their own human rights, you know. So, and I'm also a bit wondered, like homelessness with young people, it's increasing a lot. I don't hear about it, so I wonder like what the concept is going to look like. I would really like to read it, but I think as researchers we should put everything in a research also according to those missing topics.
Okay, so now we can answer.
Yeah, what, working? Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know if I'm in the position to tell the youth worker what to do. But now the thing is, the trouble is real. It's real. My personal call for allies, for youth workers, for people there working with young people is to keep it real as well. So it's not the rainbow land where everything is so good. Clearly it's not, but it's also not the end. That's also quite clear, I guess, looking at the history. So for the argument we have in the concept paper is, if that youth worker knows their own rights and also rights of the young people, then the way that this bad news will be communicated or will be experienced is not only, sorry, you are rejected, but it goes beyond. It explains, and it doesn't justify why it was rejected, but it shares with that young people as well that this is against human rights. And yeah? Yes, and this is one another tension. I mean, this is also one of the things that we discuss. Youth work is for sure based on tensions, no? Lots of tensions. There are personal, political tensions, there are practical tensions, especially if you're a youth worker that is hired by the state. So how far? It's a question of autonomy, and each youth worker has to navigate how much they would like to have their own autonomy in their work with young people, clearly. And this is one of the big cases that we have is through human rights education, we actually provide a compass. We could provide compass for youth workers to navigate themselves better within all those tensions. So I think, yeah, keeping it real is the reality of it.
Yeah, I think, I mean, you know, the big interest in political and juridical aspects of human rights education also surely comes from these tensions, right? That people want to know more for their own youth work about how human rights are enshrined and encoded into law and how that can be morally complicated nonetheless, and how you deal with that contradiction in youth work. But to come back to your question, no, we don't see that as a contradiction at all either. We just knew from previous work, looking only at knowledge, skills, values, attitudes is just going to give us a beautiful fog that pretends that everything is pretty. And so we wanted to have a different way of looking at it and chose this particular one, not because, you know, we are big proponents of replacing one with the other, just because we wanted to have an additional entry point. And already when we looked at the outcome of that, we were thinking, oh man, we should have maybe added a moral dimension or moral aspect, or, you know. So this is very much work in the making and not meant as a contradiction at all.
Miguel, you take the challenge.
Yes, well, this is what I was trying to express, that when I said that for the good and for the bad, those missing points were still valid today after this project, and I'm afraid after many other projects, because, well, the possibilities to address those issues are always limited. So yes, of course, once you made an analysis of what is missing, what follows, should take that into consideration. And I think this project has done it. I'm not the evaluator of this project, but as far as I know, it has very much followed those missing points or try to contribute to that. But what I find interesting, and I think we are not out of this, is that when asking about topics, practitioners answer about groups of people. It's a bit this paradox. When asking about competencies, people answer other things. No. So I think we are receiving a lot of signals that we should rethink our approaches in very different directions. I think very often our human rights education approach is topics-based, and maybe we should be more consistent on focus group-based and with very specialized knowledge or competencies for that. So this I found significant. And I think more and more people, and this might be pessimistic or optimistic, I don't know, they feel that their human rights are not being respected. Those are bad news, but as well good news, because out of this awareness, action can be taken. And I think, in general, our field as well should be probably more attentive to that. So I agree.
I can make a short intervention unless somebody has more questions. It's more important. I don't know if anyone has more questions. I prefer.
Yeah.
But anyway, very quickly, just on the point about whether the youth worker can give legal advice. I don't think it's human rights education is about turning youth workers to human rights lawyers. I think the bar there is quite high, and I think it would be a mistake to do that. There's different roles for different things. For me, and I want to take this at the very beginning, and the presentation from the European Commission, why this project was funded in the first place, which was within the expectation that we had, and we still have a lot of activity around radicalization, violent radicalization. Radicalization can be a good thing sometimes, but violent radicalization, and asking the question why there is an increase in violent radicalization, and specifically amongst young people on this occasion. And looking at new ways of dealing with youth violent radicalization. And the standard has been so far that we'll look at a young person or somebody who potentially commits violent radicalized activities as a risk, and we're trying to minimize that risk. We do certain things to put them away, to manage the risk wherever it is. And what human rights can do, the human rights framework can do, is to turn that around and look at the young person not as a risk, but as a talent, as a potential, and then ask, what are the values within this human rights framework us as youth workers, as practitioners, as public servants can do to encourage and nurture those things that those young people have so that they are diverted from that path and not looking at them as risks. And that's what the human rights framework and human rights education can capacity build youth workers in a very focused way and not in a general way. And everybody comes from different locations, they work with different groups of young people, and that is the amazing thing about youth work. You work with young people at risk of this. You work with young people with mental health problems, with disabilities, with all these sort of things. All these things can be human rights issues, and there can be specific courses for these specific groups. And there are many areas that haven't been uncovered in terms of research and training, and you will never stop. But if we ask the question, what is the human rights framework as a concept, which is what the conceptual framework tried to do, as a concept can do to prevent or minimize the risk of young people being violently radicalized, which there is a reason for that, and own it as a society, then that's the conceptual and normative framework that it provides us all, independently of where we come from, whether we're from Germany, from the UK, Brexit countries, or whatever.
Thank you. So, a lot of reflections, key findings, data, suggestions, recommendations for rethinking the model. Thank you for all this food for thought. It will be very useful also for the workshops later. Thank you very much to the panelists. So with all the inspiration of this morning, with the two panels, the visit of the gallery of activities, we are going to lunch, and after lunch, what will happen? It will be, as I was saying before, we will enter in a lab mood. So we will start to work in the workshops. And for that, Haisa, if you can introduce the 5 workshops.
Yes, just a second before I go in the workshops, just to share with you one of the outcomes from the exploring the project's results and the outcomes. You were voting the favorite quote, right? And in a democratic fashion, I took the votes, I counted them, and the most favorite quote, the most voted quote is the number 9, which says, "The sense of urgency is missing." And now I'm stopping the quote, but saying basically there is a youth worker from Belgium who was saying this: "The sense of urgency is missing, human rights violations seem to be happening elsewhere, or people here don't feel that they're happening here." I'm not quoting now everything, it's a rather large and long quote, but the sense of urgency is missing. This is what you voted as the most, let's say, somehow the quote that speaks to you, and maybe this is something that we need to take on further. For the workshops, now to go back to what Davide was announcing, for the workshops, just one remark before going there. The workshop titles and the topics are very specific. There are also the recommendations that
Draft recommendations.
Draft recommendations that serve as the basis for those topics to be chosen. But what's very important is that we don't, and we see from these panels this morning, that we don't really just dive into specifics necessarily, but be free to also think wider and to think about the societal change or to think about different stakeholders while having our framework of youth work and human rights education. Yeah? So just to give you this. Now, I will introduce shortly, you see the titles there, but also to recognize the people and where the workshops are going to take place. So we have the workshop on the role of NAs, which will be happening here in the plenary after the lunch with Sabine Klocker and Hans-Georg Wicke. So maybe if the two of you can just maybe stand up or raise your, so that people can, thank you, can identify. Thank you, Sabine and Hans-Georg. Then we have the workshop on competence frameworks for youth workers and trainers in the youth field, which will be happening on the 7th floor. And there you will find Peter Jan Juttersport and Giselle Erward-Markovic. So please also stand up, we can see you. Ah, you are together. that was interesting, nicely. We have the 3rd workshop on inspiring better policy conditions. And this one is with Georg Pirker and Rui Gomes happening on this floor, so one of the next rooms. Can you identify yourself as well? Yes, okay. Thank you. 4th one is potential for cross-sectorial cooperation, also happening on this floor in one of the rooms next to this plenary, with Dariusz Zemny and Marko Kovacic, also identifying yourselves. Yes, okay, in that corner, in this corner, okay. And we have the 5th workshop on contributions from different youth work settings with Lyubov Lisina and Edwin Debouvet, sorry. And this one is happening, this one is happening downstairs on the 1st floor in the room called Balalaika, so it should be easy to find, I guess. Yes. So what is happening? At 1, we are having lunch, which is fairly soon, and we are continuing with workshops at 3. And you are basically supposed to go to your workshop, so not coming to the plenary unless you are in the workshop that is taking place in the plenary.
If you don't remember which is your workshop, you have the list there that will remind you.
Exactly. So the list is on the wall. We are continuing with workshops and then seeing you only tonight with an excursion and tour for Vabamu, and Davide will
Wait
just explain.
1 second, because we have to say something about Vabamu. Can you? Yeah. So you see the map there. Vabamu is a 10 minutes walk. The idea is that there is a tour. If you were booking it, it will be at 7. It will start at 7. So, or you are there at 7 directly to the Vabamu Museum, or you can go with Tom. Is there Thomas here? No. Thomas will be in the lobby. He is from the organization. He will be in the lobby and will accompany you to the Vabamu Museum at 6:45. So 6:45 or 7 directly there, if you booked the tour. Then, if you didn't book the tour and you rest or you do whatever else, and you go for the gala dinner, again, there is in the invitation, you have the address of the gala dinner, or at 7:45, Relica, which is also from the organization, will bring you there. See? To the gala dinner.
At the reception.
In the reception, in the reception. So, yeah, enjoy the workshops, and we will see during workshops and in the night. Thank you.